Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
And if you're new to the podcast, David and I are two superfans from totally different generations that take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
And today we're going to be taking a deep dive into an episode that I would say more or less always cracks my top 10 episode list. And that is The Man from My Uncle, or as my family refers to it, the government agent one. And it's a personal favorite of mine. And there's also a lot to unpack here with regard to some sort of heavier topics. So I think we're going to have just so much fun breaking it down together today.
And here's another example where the episode title is a takeoff of something that else was going on in the world. So The Man from My Uncle clearly is a takeoff of The Man from Uncle, which began, 1964 or so.
Mm-hmm.
This episode of the Dick Van Dyke Show is from season 5, episode 27, written by Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson, written on February 15th, 1966, filmed on March 1st, 1966, and aired on April 20th, 1966. Very near the end of the run of the show.
Yeah, just a few episodes to the end, which is interesting.
And directed by our guy, Jerry Paris.
I have a few synopsis of the episode. I have one that I don't think really it's odd. So here's what it's very short, but I don't think it really captures it. It says a dull weekend in the Petrie home is enlivened by the arrival of a deadpan secret agent who wants to conduct a stakeout from Richie's bedroom, which is like no mention of Harry Bond unless that's the deadpan secret agent. I think what they mean is Mr. Phillips. So very strange. And then like it doesn't even get into Harry's part at all. Just very strange one. I would never call any one of those guys deadpan. It was a strange one.
I have Rob reveling in a 3-day weekend feels the need to do something exciting and unusual. A government agent showing up and asking to use the Petrie's house for a stakeout fills the bill.
That's a good one.
Rob argues that it's their civic duty to agree, but Laura suspects all too correctly that what Rob really wants is a chance to play spy.
Just very spot on.
Yes.
I will say this is a personal favorite of mine. Maybe you do this too, David. We quote this episode probably bi-weekly, especially the binoculars bit, which we always call the binoculars the binos now all the time. And I think this is one of my favorite types of episodes. Is that we get to see Rob in his sort of naive, amateur, like sleuth enthusiasm, where he's always sort of like fascinated by danger and excitement. And he has a sort of fantasy, I feel like, where he wants to be part of the action and he's going to be the hero that saves the day. Like we see that with the cat burglar episode and things like that, especially with crime solving, his participation in that. And he gets really caught up with it. And it's just fun watching, of course, him fumble through it all because he's awful at it, So it is my favorite type.
I do think this is, one of my favorites as well. And you're right. This is another example where the writers have taken full advantage of Dick Van Dyke's ability. We'll talk about the gadgets when we get to the gadgets with Harry Bond. In addition to Rob and Laura in this episode, we have a few people fulfilling guest roles. The first one is Biff Elliott as Mr. Phillips. This was Biff's only appearance on the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Which I thought was going to be more when I was surprised. He seems like such a sort of like steady character that I assumed he would have been in more things.
I think part of that is that he was well known for having appeared on many other shows of the day. Perry Mason, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, 77 Sunset Strip, Combat, Mission Impossible. He was also in Planet of the Apes, the television version of that, and so many more.
Well, and he's sometimes played those sort of hard-boiled detective types. So I think maybe that's what I've probably seen him in something.
Yes, and he had a very, very long and interesting career.
So, like my love for Marty Ingalls, I have such an affinity for Godfrey Cambridge, who is going to be playing Harry Bond. I feel like his comedic timing is just impeccable, absolutely hilarious. Should have been in more episodes. Should have been in more things. Total. He was an American stand-up comedian, an actor of the time. He was famous for films like Watermelon Man and Cotton Comes to Harlem, things like that. But his stand-up comedy is really what I take note of when I think of him. I've watched a lot of it on YouTube. You can find a lot of great bits. We're talking like it's 1965. He has this like sharp commentary on race, society. I just thought was way ahead of its time. It's so cool to think that Carl may have been on the cutting edge of sort of like having this comedian on the show, and this guy was on the cutting edge of comedy as well. It was very cool. He gained recognition in theater too.
It was on Broadway.
Yep. And weirdly studied medicine, it said, for 3 years before dropping out to pursue a career in acting. Well, thank you for dropping out, Godfrey. Thanks for not being a doctor. So we got some good stuff.
The sad little ending to that is that he died at age 46 from a heart attack.
So young, so young.
Making a TV movie where he was set to play Ugandan dictator Idi Amin.
Wow.
And I read somewhere that Amin claimed that Cambridge's death was punishment from God.
Oh my gosh.
Because apparently of the role that he was playing or
wow.
whatever.
Heavy.
Interesting. We'll talk some more about Godfrey and his Bond character as we go on. The last character, Mr. Gerard, played by Stephen Jarre. Not only was this his only Dick Van Dyke Show appearance, it was among his last acting credits of his career.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
In reviewing his career, found he appeared on Hazel, Bonanza, Lucy Show, Danny Thomas, the shows sort of that era.
Hundreds of films and TV shows.
His career actually ran from the late 1920s to 1966.
Wow.
He's fabulous. He has some very good delivery of a number of lines.
So great. Just nails it. Yeah. David and I have the excellent chance to review the original script for this episode. And something we want to note, and we'll note as we go through in more detail, but there are a ton of changes from the original script to what was eventually aired. And a lot of the dialogue. And again, we don't always know why or how these things changed, but it's interesting to note the differences, and we'll note some key ones as we go along.
And there are some very interesting changes that were originally supposed to be included that didn't get in, and vice versa.
Yeah.
As we open, Laura's reading an article on her kitchen countertop. It looks like in a magazine. And from off stage, we hear Rob complain of a headache as he appears in the kitchen wearing a hat which has an arrow like poking through the center of it, presumably going through the center of his head.
And we get that he's sort of been wearing it all day, you know, kind of giddy. And she even says something like, well, you're in a giddy mood.
Seems he's thrilled because he has a 3-day weekend. Laura suggests if he has so much time on his hands that maybe he goes put the shoe trees back in his shoes.
And he says, well, I'm going to be in a good mood when no one's in it with me.
So with that, he sort of gets a rather devilish look on his face. And he says, well, I want to try out the Polish Air Force equilibrium test, Laura.
Which, by the way, I've looked up is not true. Does not exist.
To which he then moves forward and gets Laura to take the palms of her hands and face them down and places the water glasses filled with water on the top of her hands, basically paralyzing her. Yeah. She can't do anything.
I want to try this. I'm surprised I haven't tried this yet in my life, having seen this episode a zillion times. I'm going to try that later on today, see how it goes. I want to see if that works.
As you said, Laura's trapped, but Rob is loving it. He's like,
giddy.
Now what are you going to do? Huh? You're trapped. Laura threatens to drop the glasses, but Rob points out that they're the ones that her mother gave them, so she won't do that.
Well, then my favorite bit, the doorbell rings, and she goes, well, look now, Rob, I have to answer the door. And he goes, oh, that's right, you do, don't you? Well, listen, I'll answer the door. He's got this.
Mary does a great bit while he's gone to answer the door of like trying to balance these things or figure out a way to get them up. I wonder, was this one take? Was this a number of takes?
And did Dick give her any pointers? You know, like I'm sure he has a lot of physical comedy bits he can come up with pretty easy. So maybe he's, kind of helping her along. I don't know, but she's fantastic at it.
I think you could easily have dropped those glasses. And had to do that scene again.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Despite the fact that her mother would be mad that they broke or whatever. But she really is incredible in doing the balancing thing.
Tries to drink it at one point.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch.
Maybe you get to the edge of the sink so the glass will go in the sink or something.
Yeah.
But pretty interesting maneuvering by Mary Tyler Moore in this case.
So she's the whole time she's given this face like, oh, Rob, like I'm going to kill you kind of thing. Rob suddenly enters the scene again, kind of at a fast pace. And he grabs the glasses off her hands. He's like, Laura, there's no time for that now. There's a G-man in the living room. And my favorite line.
Says, yeah, go ahead.
And there's a nut in the kitchen. Which is so genius.
So Laura says, what does he want? Rob says, us.
Yeah. And then, of course, you get the little spooky music to the next scene where, commercial break, where we have to figure out what do they really want them? And
so we talked about the Polish Air Force equilibrium test. Originally, as you said at the top of the show, some changes from the original draft of this. There was some discussion about Rob's hat
Yes.
being a prop from the Alan Brady show that he brought home because Richie wanted it.
And says, why do you keep bringing home all these props? You know, that I'm still trying to get rid of that life-size cutout of Gabby Hayes. Do you know who Gabby Hayes is, David? I didn't
Gabby
look it
Hayes
up.
was an actor back in the day.
Strange
Yes.
one. Yeah.
Originally, the Polish Air Force equilibrium test was described by Rob as Rob said, I want to try something that I saw on TV.
Oh.
Who decided that we would give it a name and call it the Polish Air Force equilibrium test?
Yeah.
Wish we could be a fly on the wall and
Right?
go back and ask that question, right?
Okay, so the G-Man's in the living room. Rob and Laura are in the kitchen, and this is where they sort of discuss, like, why is there an agent here? What does he want? And they both start to feel pretty guilty, as you might when law enforcement is around. And they both start discussing, like, well, maybe did we pay our, unpaid parking tickets? No, I paid those. We're good. What about the taxes? Did you pay those? Yeah, we're clean. We're clean. They're trying to figure out what the heck is he doing here. And so they decide they're clean. They don't have anything to hide. And so they go into the living room, and here we meet Biff Elliott, who is playing Agent Phillips, who is admiring the view through the window.
Correct. And Rob introduces Laura to the agent, and Phillips says, boy, you make me sound so impressive, Mr. Petrie. Again, in the draft, Phillips also remarks that his mother wanted him to be a doctor, not a G-man.
Which is interesting because of Godfrey Cambridge being a doctor originally. I wonder if that was a little nod to that.
I don't know.
Well, and of course, we get Rob's like super naivete here too, where he says, it says, why don't you, he's a United States government agent. He says it's so official, and then of course, and this is our, why don't you sit over here? This is our government agent chair over here, which is hilarious.
So they sit down and the agent begins to explain that they would like to use the house to watch the house across the street.
Our house did something wrong?
Right. Rob says, Jerry Helpers, he's my best friend. And then he started snickers. Yeah, what did he do?
I love that line. What did he do? He's so gleeful.
The mention of Jerry was an add-on, apparently, in a later rewrite of the script.
Phillips says that, no, not Mr. Helper, but there's another neighbor, Mr. Gerard, the other neighbor. And so they say, do you know him? And she says, oh, yeah, we know Mr. Gerard. He's a nice man. Just last week, he gave Richie some candy. That she has this moment of fear. Did Richie eat the candy? And then, this is my favorite line of the whole episode, maybe of the series. Rob says, yeah, we had a dog poisoned a few years ago. And Philip says, and you think Mr. Gerard did it? He says, no, we didn't live here then. Completely irrelevant and useless.
So obtuse, right?
Obtuse.
And the look on Dick's face as he says it.
In thought, yeah.
Well, the agent goes on to explain they're actually looking for a nephew of Mr. Gerard, Louis Darnier, who's been involved in what are termed nefarious activities, ends up being gambling, and that they feel that he's recently returned to the country.
And that's why they're asking for the use of their house, is that they want to sort of observe from across the street to see if this Darnier, shows up at the house.
Laura has a great line. Have other folks let you use their house for peeking places?
She means observation. He says he always wants to be like the detective. Another line he says, so we're talking about a stakeout, aren't we? He's so giddy.
That's right.
Matter of fact, we are.
The agent reveals that the best vantage point would actually be from Richie's room in the house, since he's away with the Cub Scouts. And Laura says, how did you know that? And Rob, again, with some authority and pompousness, right, says, well, honey, they know these things.
In the original script, though, there is a little bit of a change there where they reference a camp that Richie is at, which is called Camp Wanahatchee, or I guess it's Wanahatchee. And then Philip says, oh, wait, I believe it's pronounced Wanahoochee. And Rob says, boy, you really do check things out, so that didn't make it in there for some reason.
So Wanahatchee, where the devil is it, are they thinking of these things? The agent points out that him being away is good because young boys don't keep secrets very well. And he asks if it's going to be okay to use the house. And Rob and Laura sort of look at each other and decide they need to discuss it. And the agent says, I'll step outside. They said, oh, no, we can go in the kitchen and figure it out. That's where we go to have our discussions.
So they go into the kitchen and we get those two kind of butting heads of like Rob's super excited, like, oh my God, there's going to be a detective and there's a stakeout, there's agents, like this is cool. And Laura's got a lot of concern over like, well, she doesn't want to be in what she calls a peeping Tom, and she doesn't want to be prying into someone else's personal affairs. So she doesn't really think this is good. Rob says, they're asking us to be, an responsible adult citizens. When was the last time you were asked to be a responsible adult citizen? And she says, well, you're talking like a responsible adult citizen, but I have a feeling inside there's a little boy jumping up and down saying, oh, goody, 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 cops and robbers, which is exactly what is happening already. And she knows him so well. And us as the audience are like, yep.
She points out that Rob still has his Captain Midnight decoder ring.
Which totally makes sense.
The other thing, I think this is a little insider's joke and tip of the hat, is in the draft, there's this discussion going on between Rob and Laura. And Rob makes a comment that it didn't bother Laura so much when the Idlesons lived next door.
Yes.
Which, of course, is a reference to Bill Idelson, the guy that played Herman Glibscher.
And wrote some episodes, right, as well?
Right. A little inside tip of the hat, didn't make it to the final cut.
Now, there was also a line after that didn't make it to the final cut that I thought was very strange, which was she says, to the Idelson living next door line, she says, it did too, but when a man beats his wife right on the front porch, you can't help but peek. And I thought, whoa. Yeah. I think someone nixed that. Like that's not what they would say. That's too much.
Ultimately, Laura concedes to allow the agent to stay there.
And Rob says, swell.
Yeah, right. He's thrilled about it under one condition, and that's if they review his identification and confirm that he truly is FBI. And Rob's like, that's so embarrassing. And she said, well, better than being embarrassed because you got mugged by letting someone into your house.
Hilarious. She's such a voice of reason. I love how he's so enthusiastic and wants to be so on the side of the detective that he's ready to just like, well, I don't know who it is, but who cares? Because I don't want to come off as like, someone that doesn't know what's happening.
So off they go back to the living room to tell the agent that it will work.
Of course, the great bit we all remember, which is they ask, the agent, can you show the ID again? I saw it, but my wife didn't see it. Can you show it again? And as he's showing it, he's getting the ID out. Laura says, well, my mother always told me to check the picture, on the back of the cab seat with the driver. And I don't know what good it does, but you do things for your mother. And Rob's face is just like, oh my God, like, what is she saying?
So he flashes the ID and she says, yeah, that's okay. And he's like, well, no, that's not my ID. I didn't show you the ID yet. Oh, and then he finally does show it to her and it's okay. We talked at the top of the show about how when the agent said he made him sound so official, his mother wanted him to be a doctor, right?
Yeah.
Again, in the draft, at this point, when he flips through the credentials, there's a photo in the wallet that is there. And Laura sees it and asks if that's the agent's family. And he says, well, yes, it is. He said, that's actually my mother hugging my brother, who, by the way, my brother is a doctor.
Sometimes I wonder if it's just cut for time too. Like, do they have enough time to insert all these little jokes? They got to really pick and choose, I'm sure,
But it's interesting the way that just these little extra lines could have been woven in there and changed a bit of the complexion of the dialogue and the humor.
And I'm so happy we have the original to look at like that and to see those changes. It's just fascinating. Okay, so scene 4 it's late afternoon, and here we have the arrival of our main character, Godfrey Cambridge, Harry Bond. Now, we do want to take a little bit of a pause here and talk about the racial tensions that were going on at the time. I'm going to read a bit of the script from when Harry Bond's character is introduced, and I think it will give us sort of an introduction into what was happening at the time. Stage directions say, interior Richie's room, late afternoon. And the first line says, we see Harry Bond, comma, a Negro, comma, lifting heavy case up on a desk in Richie's room. Now, is a moment where, a person of color is being introduced using language that was probably considered normal at the time, but is now very outdated and limiting and inappropriate and those things like that. But I think it just reflects the time of race sort of was casually emphasized in older media, even when it wasn't, really relevant to the story. And I think it's just kind of a reminder that TV and film sort of can reflect those broader social attitudes. Even though we can recognize how loaded and limiting that kind of thing can be now, we can just appreciate the show's history and acknowledge that not all the choices were great. Having said that, most mainstream shows of that era were 100%, maybe 99% white, both in casting and storytelling. Black characters, people of color in general, usually completely absent altogether, or if they did appear, it was in some limited stereotypical role made or something like that. So this show has 4 episodes in its run that really feature actors of color. So we have That's My Boy in season 3 with Greg Morris, who plays the Peters, and his wife. And then we have Bupkis, where he makes another appearance as Styx Mandalay. And then we have Show of Hands, which is about the CIU and Rob going to the sort of like award ceremony and they dye their hands black. And then we also have this one, which is season 5, which is The Man from U.N.C.L.E. And we have Harry Bond. So I think at the time to even have Greg Morris or Godfrey Cambridge even appear in the show in general as these sort of like non-subservient middle-class people was a major step forward because of all the other things. Even if you look at Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie, which are late 60s, there is not a person of color to be had. There was no thoughtful inclusion of them whatsoever anywhere. And I think to look at this show and see that it's 1963, 1962, we're going back there and it's already looking towards inclusivity. So I think that's a major step forward. Then another spot that I think was a major step forward is that from season 3 to season 5, you still have a few years there, but it has made such a leap. So in season 3, and That's My Boy, while they're not making fun of people of color, the joke's on Rob, as they always remind us. Still, the joke is about race. The reason they're there, the point that they're there, the angle of the character is that they are black, and that's kind of the joke, which is, again, makes sense for the time. However, season 5, here we have Harry Bond. It's not about his race. Again, he was mentioned in the stage directions who he would be, but that could have been also. Did they already know Godfrey was going to play the character? Who knows? Did they have this idea from something else they've seen? You never know. But either way, here he is in season 5, just a few years later, and Carl's got him. He's just a regular guy, and he's a regular job and middle class and just working a normal life. And it's not touched on at all. And I think that is really cool that they were able to sort of move towards that, just sort of like visibility for him. And I just thought it was really cool to see that.
Carl, in his later years, wrote a book called Why and When the Dick Van Dyke Show was born. And he makes a particular note that 2 shows really featured black actors. As you mentioned, Greg Morris and That's My Boy, and Cambridge in this as Harry Bond. And Carl offered the interesting aside that he got a call from a CBS executive after this particular show aired. And the gentleman asked if Carl knew if there were any black agents actually working in the FBI. And Carl said, well, if there aren't, there are now.
Powerful.
What they were setting the tone for was, a black guy can be an FBI agent.
And Carl, knowing how important TV and film media is to the push for social movements and things like that, and how he had a platform that he could make those things more visible. Very cool.
Just a few years later, Sheldon Leonard continued that by doing I Spy with Robert Culp and Bill Cosby, again featuring another black actor in a very featured role.
Carl and Sheldon, very progressive in this show for its time. Harry Bond is at the door. He rings the doorbell.
So as you mentioned, in the draft script, the scene actually opened in Richie's bedroom, but the final episode has the front doorbell ringing and Rob opening the front door to find a television repairman.
Yes, dressed as a TV repairman, hat, jacket, bag. And we get the first glimpse of his excitement with this whole operation. Who are you? We didn't call a television repairman. He says, I believe Mr. Phillips sent me, okay, my government agent, oh yeah, mine too, To sell it, Rob yells out the door, yeah, fine tuner's out of whack, something like that. And, you can already see this dynamic between how Harry's going to be shutting him down a lot during this operation, and he says, "Mr. Petrie, shouting attracts attention." Oh, right, yes.
You can almost see Bond's exasperation right from the outset of their first exchange. He says, "I know you folks are very careful about making sure you have legitimate people in your house. So he said, here's my ID," and he opens it up and flips it out, and Rob says, "Oh." Harry Bond. Bond. Yeah, you're just like that. And Cambridge says, no, please don't say that. I'm not 007.
No jokes. Weirdly, in the original script, there is a little bit of a different take on that, which he says, Rob reads the idea, Harry Bond, hey, you got the same last name as, and then Harry says, yeah, but please don't make any jokes. Since those movies came out, I shudder every time I show my card. My number is 854-630-11. Nobody has number 007. And I don't have a license to kill. And Rob says, I didn't think you did. And Harry says, my wife does, though, her driver's license. That's kind of great.
Rob says, let me show you to the boys' room. And Bond says, huh?
Beg your pardon?
He says, to my son's room where the stakeout will be. Oh, okay. We got it. Down the hall, they go to Richie's room. fans of the show debate this and discuss this a lot
Yes.
because they're going down the hall and everybody figures that they should be taking a left-hand turn into Richie's room. But as the camera cuts to the bedroom, you can see them sort of taking a right-hand turn into the room. So there's all this discussion about how is the house laid out and where is Richie's room really? And that's wrong. He can't be down there, blah, 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 blah. But
we could take a look too at Marina Coates' rendering of the house, because she does architectural renderings of all TV houses, movie houses, and people should check her out. It's very, very cool. There's sometimes 3D ones where she'll, a video where she'll walk you through the house. We'll have to see how she set it up. I can't remember if she's got it to the left or right, or how she remedied that, but I'll take a look.
Yes, I think she would support the argument that they should have probably turned left and gone into the, but for whatever reason, again, who would have thought some 60 years later we would be dissecting this down to the nth degree? We do go into Richie's room, and it is interesting if you sort of hit freeze frame and look at the scene, look at the room. There's some interesting artifacts around the room, sort of monsterish sort of decor, which also includes two puppets that were puppets of the Addams Family characters, which of course was a show of the day.
Which is rare because they don't allude to a lot of the day in the show, but it's just sort of in the background. Harry and Rob are in the room. Harry's setting up his shop at the window there with his equipment. He's pulling out all his equipment. He's getting ready to observe. And in the original script, there is a bit where he actually kind of refers to some monsters. Did you see this part, David?
Yes.
Harry says something. He says he picks up a monster model that I guess Richie has to put up the camera. And he says, "Oh, your son likes monsters, huh?" And Rob said, "Yeah, he's at that gory age." And Harry says, "They're all like that. My daughter loves vampires. I caught her trying to bite her doll in the neck or something." And it's just funny, probably alluding to some other monster thing in the room. I'm guessing that they didn't work out to have. But
with that, Laura comes into the bedroom and gets introduced, and the sort of the same thing happens. Oh, he shows the credentials, and she's like, Bond, and Rob's like, don't say anything about Bond. We already did that.
Like he's on the other side now, I know better now.
But Laura, trying to be a gracious hostess for the G-Man, says, I washed the window. So, you had a nice clear view.
He says, yeah.
And Bond says, well, thank you, but you could really see that from the outside.
Looks a little funny from outside, cleaner than all the others. Yeah.
Draws a little attention to it.
And then Rob, of course, chimes in, "Honey, you shouldn't have done that," like as if he knew. So the walkie-talkie starts buzzing at this point. Right away, this is like, Rob's like, "Ooh, walkie-talkie. Someone's on the other end." He's just fascinated already. And they get the message from Marvin, who's stationed in the TV repair truck that's down the street, that Darnier, the person they are supposed to be staking out for, was seen in Sector 6 an hour ago. And Harry says, "Sector 6, that's us."
I cannot confirm this. Maybe those of you who are other fans of the show, shoot us a note in our comments or send us email. See if you agree with me. I believe the voice of Marvin is played by the actor Burt Remsen. It's a very familiar voice, and I couldn't place it. And suddenly I think I realized that Burt played the role of the heckler in the Van Williams "No Rice at My Wedding" episode.
Oh, okay.
He yells from the crowd. He sort of has a unique sound to his voice, and that's who I think. I don't find it anywhere in the credits.
Oh, I'm excited to go back and listen to the "No Rice at My Wedding" to see how he sounds. That's very cool, David.
He also played the bartender in Bad Reception in Albany. So there's another place that you can sort of hear him or see him and see what you think of whether the voice matches up.
How do they do that, David, with the walkie-talkie and all of that on the set? Is the audience hearing it, or how are they doing that, I wonder?
I'm sure they're hearing it, whether they actually had a walkie-talkie so that you would hear the radio type sound of that, or whether they did something in post-production.
Maybe the actor was just talking into a microphone during the episode so they could hear it. Yeah, that's interesting.
But definitely the audience had to hear it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have made sense. Right.
Well, so then Rob says, well, what can we do to help? They got to get staken out because the guys get in their sector. So Rob says, what can we do to help? And he says, have you had dinner yet? He says, no. Why don't you have dinner? So trying to kind of get him out of the way. Like, I don't need you in here. Get lost kind of thing. So the stakeout begins, which is the crux of the episode.
And we advance now to later in the evening, nighttime in Richie's bedroom. As the scene opens, we sort of see Bond sitting there at the desk, and we hear some very serious background music as the scene opens. And fans probably recognize that this music, also written by Earl Hagen, but originally written for the Andy Griffith Show.
Ah,
So it's the same sort
cool.
of dun 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 dun, dun,
Yeah,
right? Andy Griffith all over it.
very cool.
We hear it here, and we also hear it, I think, at the very end.
Oh, yes, that's right. At the very, very end.
At the time, who would have thought Hagen's producing the
Yeah.
music for the Andy Griffith Show at the same time as the Dick Van Dyke Show, and probably thought, well, this would be perfect music, crime fighting music, if you will,
Yeah, it works perfect. Yeah, it's a great, great
right?
little
So
vibe to have.
thank you, Earl, for that. And a little bit of the crossover sort of makes the Desi Luke a lot closer as one.
Rob enters the room. It's dark. Harry's looking out the window with his binoculars. Rob enters. He's got a plate of something for Harry, some snacks or something, and he sort of comes over to where Harry Bond is, looking out the window, and he starts standing near him and just closer and closer starts leaning down until he's blocking, the whole view Harry has on his binoculars. And he says, Mr. Petrie, you're blocking me. So this is like another scene where it's already revving up that he's just like, oh God, this guy's a pain. And then you know what?
Rob says that Laura made him, yes, some nut chewies. And the Bond says, oh, that was so good. But he said, oh, I can't eat them because I have a toothache and I'm afraid that it's going to aggravate it. So I got to pass. And he said, okay, we understand.
The next bit of this scene, I would say, is the scene we've kind of all been waiting for. We saw Harry unloading his gadgets earlier, and this reminds me a lot of a scene. I reference it a lot. The police station scene in the episode where Rob has to identify the perpetrator of the robbery kind of thing, and he has to go down to identify somebody. And we see the police outfit hanging in the station, and we know right away Rob's going to go for it and try it on. And it's going to be hysterical. So I feel like this is similar. Like we see all the gadgets laying there, and you're just like, oh man, this is going to be good. He's going to start going for it. And of course, he starts right away examining everything in front of him,
Picks up the walkie talkie and he says, oh, just like one like my son Richie had.
which is going to come back as a great gag later.
It will. He picks up what appears to be a pen and he looks at Bond and says, huh? He says, don't open that. And he's like, oh, what is it? And he says, oh, it's a homing device. Oh, that's pretty impressive. Oh, look, this camera is really
infrared
nice.
film in it. Oh, wow.
Oh, look at this. Really compact. A nice small tape recorder.
So he's just into it, pestering him with all these, questions. And then he picks up a banana, which is the best gag. And he's looking at it.
And he looks at it. He says, you can see he's trying to figure out what secret little appliance could this be? To which Bond looks at him and says, it's a banana.
It's so good. The moment they have together there, his like just deadpan look, like it's a banana.
So Rob asks Bond if he's ever killed anybody in his line of work. And the agent says, no, he hasn't ever killed anyone. He's wounded them.
Now,
though.
this is in the original, correct?
Yes, in the original script, right? Yeah, we don't see this, but this was dialogue that went back and forth between them. Rob remarks to the agents, well, you're probably not trained to kill. And Harry says, well, we are, but I'm just a bad shot.
Well, and then the banana was another bit that wasn't in there where Rob picks up the banana and he says, it's a banana. Harry says, it's a banana. And Rob says, a banana recorder? He says, what's a banana recorder? I don't know. I'm not familiar with all your equipment. Harry says, this isn't a gadget. It's a banana. I like bananas because they're soft and they won't hurt my tooth. And Rob says, oh, it's just a plain banana, huh? And Harry says, you want to peel it and see? Which I think would have been a great line. He says, no, excuse me for acting a little silly. It's my first stakeout. That would have been a great one. But I think the way they did it was better with the look between them about the banana. You almost didn't even have to say anything to get the joke. It was perfect.
Bond has been looking out the window, and with that, Rob also looks out and says, oh, look, someone's going by the house next door. And the agent Bond says, well, it looks like it's the paperboy. Rob says, yeah, but it's not the regular paperboy.
So Bond gets up ready to walkie-talkie. Yeah, you're like, oh.
And Rob says, it's the weekend boy. He's like, oh, okay, Mr. Petrie, that's fine.
He says, well, this is the weekend. It reminds me of the cat poisoning joke. It's like irrelevant information that's not at all helpful. So he says, well, thank you, Mr. Petrie. You did remind me to check in, though. I got to check in with Marvin on my walkie-talkie. So, of course, Rob's right over his shoulder, checking in with him, wanting to be in on the action. He says, yeah, everything's quiet here, Marvin. Nobody's been by except the paperboy. And then Rob gives him a look, and he goes, the weekend paperboy. Like, he's got to, add it in there.
And apparently, Marvin has been clued in at some other point in time from Bond, because Marvin asked the question, how's your junior G-man? And Bond quickly says, Marvin, is this confidential, classified? Because Mr. Petrie's here in the room with me. And Marvin takes the hint very quickly.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is classified. Which I think is great. You know, like, yeah, they've been having these conversations. It makes it so real. They're like, oh man, this is pain in the butt guy. And like,
So in the end, Rob, ends up exiting so he doesn't impose upon their confidential conversation. Again, another reference in the original script was the reference to your junior G-man was not in
yeah.
there. Instead, Marvin starts to tell a little gossip to Bond about the little dame in the fingerprint department. So you can only imagine where that was going to go. But for some reason, probably, and I think funnier.
It's funnier when it has nothing to do with the plot at hand. So it's like kind of gives a little bit about Marvin, but you don't, it's more funny if you can tie it back to, I think, the plot that's going on with Rob. And so I think that was perfect. Everything has to do with it.
So Rob returns to the living room and convinces Laura that they need to act natural and do things. So he's going to go outside and get the newspaper from the front walk that had been delivered. The door opens and you sort of are waiting for him to come back with the paper. When he returns, he says, Did you see I almost blew it by waving at Bond? Gave him one of these. He sort of raises his hand. He says, I quickly pulled it back down so I didn't attract attention.
You can envision that whole bit, without even having to see it. So they're talking about, how's it going in there? And she says, did he eat the nut chewies? He said, no, he's got a bad tooth. How can he spy with a bad tooth? He says, honey, those guys are trained to spy with bamboo shoots under their fingernails. He's got his like little detective voice on, kind of thing. And so they're just going back and forth. Like, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to just sit in here and act natural. And she says, let's go to a movie or something. Let's get out of here.
Rob says, no, we have to stay here in case Bond needs us for something. And she's like, well, what? Well, I don't know, nut chewies or whatever. They finally ultimately determined that because they've been so encumbered with everything that's going on that they haven't eaten dinner yet. So Rob says that they should have dinner, but Laura needs to fix something light because he might have to, be quick and dodgy. And
energy food. God, might have to move, So now, interestingly, I would say this is one of the biggest scenes where there was a lot of script changes to the whole conversation between Rob and Laura in the living room. It is quite different. It goes off into tangents that aren't relevant at all and are very new and strange. And we would love to read that bit with each other just to give you the feel of what that scene was like between Rob and Laura, or how it could have been had they used the original script.
Rob laments that it's been hours since Darnier was sighted in Sector 6, but that nothing has happened. So what Abby and I would like to do for you is read the scene as it was originally written in the draft, and we'll pick it up where Rob has just talked about Darnier. And Rob says, it's just that we got all keyed up and excited, and now nothing.
And Laura says, well, what did you expect? You talk like you want trouble.
I don't, but a little excitement, maybe. What is it to have a G-man in your house who sits and eats a banana?
Did he like the nut chewies?
No, he's got a bad tooth. We should have just gone to the movies.
I don't like to leave the house with a stranger in it.
Honey, he's a government agent. He's not going to steal the silver. Well, what's the use arguing about it now? We didn't go.
In the mood you're in, the best thing to do is to go to sleep. That's what I'm going to do.
Should we go to bed and leave the guest up?
He's not a guest. He's a government agent.
Yeah. I wonder what the rules of etiquette are for a stakeout.
Let's go to bed.
Laura, every time there's any action, you want me to go to bed.
You just said there wasn't any action.
But there might be. I don't want to repeat New Year's Eve, 1962.
New Year's Eve, 1962?
Sure. We were at the Dexter's party and I didn't feel good, so you told me to lie down and sleep.
I did it for your own good.
Yeah, but I missed 12 o'clock. I slept right through all the horns and the blowers and whatever.
What's the blowers and all that? What's that?
The noisemaker you blow and it goes, boom. It doesn't have to name, but I'd love to blow them.
Well, when you woke up, you got to celebrate.
It's not much fun to blow a used horn at 12:45.
Such an interesting alternate take we could have had there.
And I wonder if, as we've discussed previous podcasts and most fans know, Carl was very particular about not trying to date the show or have references that would make it be dated. And I wonder if the specifics of mentioning 1962 was something that they elected to chop out and go in a different direction.
It very well could be.
Another alternate scene that would have been very, very interesting.
They go to have dinner, presumably. And we're in the next scene now, which is, I guess, scene 7, if I've been counting. Richie's bedroom again. It is completely dark. Harry Bond's at the window, still looking out his binoculars. And Rob enters and flips on the light. And all chaos ensues. Harry's got to jump out of the way from the window so no one sees him. Rob drops to the floor like he's, being shot at, basically. He's
Yeah, what
laid,
happened?
full. The lights, Mr. Petrie. Oh, they can see me from across the street. They can see me from Denver, which is, as a kid, I used to say that line all the time. Oh, they can see that from Denver. And people were like, what are you talking about? It was just this very specific line I thought was hilarious. Strangely, though, in the original, David, I don't know if you have this, but there was no bit about the lights at all. It was just he comes into the room, which I'm like, what a way to pass up that opportunity.
Great thing. And haven't we all been there?
Yes,
Haven't
yeah.
you done something like you're in the house, you turn the lights on, and someone will say to you, everybody can see in and see what's going on. Turn
Right.
that light off. Discussion between Bond and Rob, and Bond is, talking about how his toothache has really gotten bad. And Rob suggests that he could call Jerry, and Bond says that wouldn't be a good idea. Apparently, Bond couldn't resist the nut chewies and aggravated the toothache.
And his replacement's due in an hour, and he thinks he can hold out, but his pain is so intense that he can barely see straight. The pain's going through to his eyes almost, and we right away see Rob's wheels spinning a little bit, like, maybe this is an opportunity where I could insert myself here, and it's just slowly starts laying the groundwork.
Yes, he humbly suggests that Bond could rest and lay down, and Rob could take over.
Oh, that looks awfully swollen. I don't know.
He eventually convinces Bond to go and rinse with warm water and tells him, put an aspirin right on the tooth. That'll sort of help.
And let's not forget the line at the end where he really lays it on thick when he says, with all that pain, you might miss something out that window.
So as Bond moves toward the bathroom, Rob asks him for the binos. And Bond sort of
The
looks at him
what?
like, huh? And he says, the binocs. And Bond says, huh? Oh, the
Oh,
binoculars.
oh,
You mean
binocular.
the binoculars? Hands them over. So you talked about this line. I think all fans know, yeah, the binocs. If you say binocs,
It's just a riot. Yeah. You get like the full thing that is Rob in this moment where he wants to be official. He wants to talk about everything in the jargon, like you get everything in that moment. And then the line after that also sells it where he looks down at sort of the notebook. Should I log in or anything here? Yeah. And he's like, no, just look. But just really wants to be, in it. It's so great.
so the binoculars were supposed to be a much bigger
Yes.
tool for Dick to create some comedy. He was apparently holding the binoculars up and does something, and they slip out of his hands, and the binoculars swing down and whack him in the chest.
Yep.
Dick, of course, would respond like Dick would somehow and make it a bit. Basically, Bond at this point says, stop playing with the gadgets, Mr. Petrie. Just sit there and look.
In the show that aired, we have Rob sitting there and Harry sort of resting in his chair, and then Rob sort of like, fooling with some of the equipment in front of him. And we have the same thing in the original script, but instead of the other things that he touches, he picks up the walkie-talkie and kind of fiddles with the dial, and he gets this huge feedback sound, kind of thing. And he's got to, quick put it back, and Harry leaps up. What happened? Oh, I'm sorry. And he says, this isn't going to work, Mr. Petrie. Why don't you go back to bed? I think I can stand my toothache another hour. And I go, no, just, give me one more chance kind of thing. So he finally lets him. But in the real one, it's more subtler, I think, than the walkie-talkie, which is the camera bit. Rob's kind of sitting there looking like he's getting kind of bored. I feel like here we see Rob finding out that being an agent isn't like all cops and robbers. It's not like TV. He's got to sit at this stakeout for hours on end. And it's like the first time you see a movie being filmed, you're like, wow, this is kind of boring. Like there's a lot of waiting around. I feel like he's having that moment where like, oh man, I'm just sitting looking out the window. This is boring. So he gets kind of bored. And so starts looking at all the equipment.
It's a perfect vehicle for Dick, to pick
Yes.
up the camera and sort of look out the window through the lens and take over there. And he
Yep.
sort of looks up at the ceiling and he turns around, and before you know it, he's pointing the camera at Bond, and without realizing it, click.
And he says, what happened? What happened? Nothing. All quiet out there.
With that, Rob says, Mr. Bond, I took a picture with the camera. And he says,
Of what?
of you sleeping. And then this Cambridge has such a great delivery. Mr. Petrie, why did you do that?
It's his best line, I think.
The delivery
Yeah,
by
so
Godfrey
good.
Cambridge is like so many other lines that he's delivered.
Just so spot on.
You can almost hear him saying, I'm so tired
Yeah.
of you being in the room
Yeah,
and
can I
bothering
just-
me and playing with my equipment. But so he doesn't have to say it, though. It's so revealed by the tone of his voice in that.
So good. So after that, Rob apologizes, for the photo. And then we start getting the kind of climax of the episode, which is that Rob, looking out the window as he's chatting with Harry, sees somebody, Mr. Gerard's door opening. and somebody coming out. So he quick says, "Oh, yeah, somebody's coming out," So then you got Harry over there trying to walkie-talkie to Marvin to tell him what's happening. You got Rob, he tells him, "Rob, keep looking and tell me what you see," kind of thing. And so Rob's, he's excited now. We're happy now because he's part of the action finally. But we also see that when he's asked to be part of the action, he kind of is all over the place. He's fumbling. He's like, scrambling up in his chair. He's not super composed.
Starting to panic for sure.
Yeah, starting to panic. And so Rob keeps narrating what's it, Gerard, he's coming across the street. He's coming up the front door. He's at the front door. And the whole time Harry's got this walkie-talkie and he's like, "This won't work, this darn thing. What's the matter with this thing?" He's hitting it and you hear Rob just quickly, "Oh, it's out of batteries. That's my son's."
And Rob had taken his and put it over on the desk away from where the other tools were. Rob says, "Gerard's coming to the front door. What are we doing?" He says, "You go answer the door, Mr. Petrie, and I'll be right behind you."
And then he says, "I'll be right with you, so there won't be any trouble." And he says, "Well, what's the gun for? So there won't be any trouble."
So into the living room they go. Bond pulls out his gun and tells Rob that he'll cover him. And now here he says, "Mr. Petrie, I'm a marksman." We had that exchange earlier about, did he kill anybody? Oh, he just wounded him because he was a bad shot. But here he literally sets us up and lets us know he's a marksman from the kitchen.
Yeah, which would have been kind of fun to have the juxtaposition of those two things. But
yes.
So Rob's looking really scared. He goes to answer the door. So Harry Bond goes to the kitchen to cover him. Rob goes to the door. The way he opens the door and quickly and then positions himself out of the way, and just in case a shot has to be taken in his direction, so he's in the clear. I mean, it was just hilarious. He scoots out of the way. And we see Mr. Gerard is at the door.
Gerard comes in, very upset, all of sorts, and he explains that his privacy has been invaded. And the accent is great. I love the accent.
And his little bow tie. It's a great character. Rob and the viewer, we both think that my privacy has been invaded. We're assuming, oh, he knows that there's a stakeout, that watching him from across the street. So we kind of get panicky, as well.
With all of the commotion, a few moments later, Laura comes from the bedroom, having heard the voices. And Laura looks at Rob and sees Mr. Gerard and sort of says to Rob visually, without words, "Where's Harry Bond?" And Rob says, "Oh, he's in the kitchen. He's in the kitchen. Our puppy. He's in the kitchen."
So starts a kind of trio of the old, like, "this is it" gag kind of, that we love so much, where somebody's reaching. And so this does this multiple times. There's a great payoff in the end. And I think this is such an old, like, vaudeville bit, but it works so well when you do it well with great actors. So
Rob goes over and joins Laura and sort of puts his arm around her to, I'm saying, sort of protect her, right?
Uh-huh.
Across the room, as far away from Gerard. But then Gerard approaches and goes to reach in his pocket, as you said, and they like hit the deck, right? Down they go.
It's like
right?
This is it from Big Mac's Cavada. This is it, But they both collapse together, holding each other. And he's, "What happened?" We just tripped, kind of thing. They get up.
Turns out Gerard was actually going into his pocket to pull out a cigarette from his pack of cigarettes.
And then Rob starts asking him, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And he's kind of talking very cryptically, "Oh, there's no peace in my heart," and all these things. And they're like, "What's happening?" Kind of leaves the viewer, and Rob like, "What does he want?" And a second time, he goes to reach into his pocket, Mr. Gerard. And Rob decides to yell, "Mr. Bond! Mr. Bond, our puppy, Mr. Bond, Mr. Puppy," or something. It sort of starts. And so they realize, okay, I forget what he was pulling out there. I don't even know. Was it the lighter? I'm not sure. But he pulls out something else.
Interestingly, we have a little continuity issue here with Mr. Gerard and the cigarette, because we never actually see him light the cigarette. But later in the scene, he has the cigarette in his hand and there's ashes on the end of the cigarette.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
It has been lit. At some point, apparently got cut out in the editing.
And so Gerard says, "I need to use the telephone." He goes to the telephone and he pulls out an actual gun. So we get this payoff where the first times were these false starts, where they think he's pulling out a gun. And then this one just comes out of nowhere. And you can almost hear the audience like, "Oh, like there's a gun now." And it's really effective. And so when he pulls out the gun, though, panic ensues.
Bond comes flying in from the kitchen and says, "Put your hands up." At which point Rob puts his hands up and Gerard puts his hands up. And Bond says, "Well, not you." And Gerard puts his down and Rob puts his down. And he goes, "No, you."
"No, not you, him. No, you up." It's just, again, a great, like, kind of vaudeville bit. Up, down, over there. They're throwing the gun. Rob's throwing the gun to Harry. I mean, it's just all over. It's like a farce, it's all over the place. Rob has a gun now, but Harry takes the gun from him and he says, "Gerard, what are you doing here?" And we finally find out that Gerard's kind of on the good side of things, that he says his nephew is a wanted criminal and he was asleep in his bed and this gun was in the bed with him and he found it. And so now he needs to call the police to kind of let them know that he's there. And so we get like, oh, okay, the whole time Gerard was a nice guy. He was on the good side of things.
And Bond says, "You don't need to call the police. I'll take care of it."
And Gerard's got the phone in his hand.
Gerard says to Bond, "Well, who are you?" And Rob replies, "He is a special agent
of our government." Yeah.
Gerard is just perplexed. He's like, "The police are here? How could the police be here already? The
Already
police
here?
are here?
How?
Everything is going so fast," Gerard says. Gerard starts to accompany Bond toward the door, and as he's going, he's carrying the phone with him across the room. And Rob says, "Can we have the phone?" And Gerard says, "Yeah, I have one of these at home." It's hysterical, the delivery and the way that it goes.
He's great. He's so unassuming. Like the way he delivers things. It's so subtle.
So Bond and Gerard exit to go to arrest the nephew. And as you said, Rob is very excited and wants to see the criminal being apprehended.
By the way, he's in his pajamas at this point. We forgot to mention that earlier.
He runs to the closet to grab his coat. And Laura says, "Rob, where are you going? It's cold out." He said, "Yeah, I'm not going to miss this, right?" So he also grabs the crazy hat that he had at the beginning of the episode.
Which is so great. What a great circle.
The comments made, "They'll never notice him."
And I should have known watching the episode for the first time that was going to come back at the end. I had no idea. It's just brilliant that hat makes another appearance right at the end there.
We can only assume at this point Bond has apprehended the criminal from across the street. Rob and Laura have returned to Richie's bedroom.
They're kind of tidying up from the stakeout, but all of Harry's equipment is still there on the desk. Rob starts playing with it again, and Laura says, "Don't play with their equipment, Rob." And he's, "Oh, he let me."
At this point, again, we talked about the confusion between the agents, walkie-talkie, and Richie. And I guess it's up to us to decide, but I always had the impression that Rob was really just playing around with Richie's walkie-talkie, pretend like he was the secret agent guy, right? Rob says, "Hello, Thrush. This is Agent 0009. If you do not release our agents immediately, we will activate our atomic deactivator and we will blow up your tonsils. Do you read me there, Thrush?"
He says, "This is Thrush. We'll release all of your agents if you just stop playing with our equipment."
Do you know what the reference to Thrush is?
I don't at all.
Thrush was the name of the fictional organization from the TV show The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, that makes sense.
So it was sort of the little tip of the hat to The Man from U.N.C.L.E. by making reference to Thrush. The delivery of Cambridge's line, right? "If you just stop playing with our equipment."
And he says, "Oh, I thought this was my son's." He said, "That's all right, 0009. We'll be right in."
So Laura says, "Are you happy now?" And Rob says, "Yes, they're releasing our agents."
And he does that great finger pinch where that was just going to be a line at the end and it was going to end. And he added in that little physical touch where he's, putting the walkie-talkie antenna back and pinches his finger in it. I think it just really makes the last line kind of land. And he's so good at that.
There are so many little things like that in so many
Yes.
episodes of the series that I'm sure never scripted, but Dick just took the object that he had or the scene that he was playing and adds so much with these little subtle things that he does.
It just adds another level.
As the episode ends here, we hear Hagen's theme music to play off to the final credits.
Great episode. Again, always cracks my top 10. Maybe for some viewers or for some listeners it will as well. You get the great Rob cops and robbers bit, which we've, again, seen in a lot of episodes. And I love the scripts that harken back to sort of like the ongoing gags that run throughout it, which is like he's kind of wants to be the good guy hero. And then we get that in all these different ways. Again, so you can even, as it's starting the episode, oh, okay, I know exactly what Rob's going to do here. And you're ready for the comedy. The great cops and robbers type thing. Godfrey Cambridge making this amazing character come to life for us. Just hysterical. And then, of course, it was fun to go through all those massive script changes together and just to see what had changed and what hadn't. I thought that was so fun. I'm so glad we get to do that. We don't have all the scripts for all of the episodes, but the ones that we do, it's been very cool to see the changes.
This is just a great example of Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson's writing and the ideas.
And also the racial sensitivity and, wanting to include and create visibility for these people from Carl and Sheldon and probably Gary and Jerry.
And as we mentioned, very near the end of the show. So the maturity level of our characters has been so well developed at this point that you really can, in so many ways, almost anticipate how Laura might react or how Rob might react because we feel like we know them so well.
We do know them so well. Yeah, totally.
Another episode in the book, Abby. To you fans, we hope you've enjoyed today's look at The Man from My Uncle.
And if you'd like to get notified when our new episodes become available, just make sure to subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on any of the major streaming platforms.
And always remember, we're a community, so we value your comments, your questions, and your contributions to the discussions surrounding the show. So always feel free to leave some feedback on the YouTube channel or send an email to trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com with the subject of Box 7030. We always enjoy getting messages from you.
And on that note, David and I just wanted to say also a huge thank you to all of you for making this Tripping Over the Ottoman community such a welcoming, safe, and joyful space. We all know the outside world and our own personal worlds are full of stressors of all kinds. And David and I have worked really hard to make sure that this space is really a safe place where we can all, just as fellow fans of the show, escape to together. A place where we can just come to talk about the show with kindred spirits in a way that's just really positive and uplifting. And that's just about sharing appreciation for the show and each other as fellow fans.
And we're very grateful that you've continued that vision with us. And we hope that that will continue from here on in. For now, I am David.
And I'm Abby. And thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.